as though, especially from those of us who signed the Dallas statement, as though there's anything in the Dallas statement that would indicate that we would not be shocked and appalled by the taking of the life of a human being. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous, and I don't do like bullying, and so I just said, you know what, that pretty much settles it. I'm not gonna get into this. And then there's a friend of mine who always says to me, you know, God loves you, but I have a wonderful plan for your life.
Who's that?
He decided to post some videos from a conference that I had done with him at this little thing called the Founders Conference. And so all of a sudden I start getting messages from everywhere, just blowing up, you know, with stuff, you know, thank you for posting whatever. And, you know, I don't have a YouTube channel. I've never had a YouTube channel. I've never posted anything to YouTube. Everybody's thanking me for posting this stuff on YouTube. And lo and behold, my friend who always tells me God loves me, but he has a wonderful plan for my life, had dropped me right in the middle of it. And I don't want to say anybody's name, you know, Tom Askell, but
Tom picked a fight and then let you fight it. Is that what happened? Tom punched somebody and stepped out of the way.
Exactly. So I sent Tom a meme from The Godfather. I think it was from The Godfather Part 3, where Don Corleone says, "Just when I thought I was out, dragged me back in."
Oh yeah. Well,
so that really sort of settled it, and I felt like it was time. It was time to do this. And the other thing that really pushed me over the edge was, again, I've been living in Zambia for the last 5 years. And you got to understand, you know, here in Zambia, the police don't protect and serve. If somebody was to break into my house right now, I couldn't call the police. If I did call them, they wouldn't come. If something happened and I needed the police, I would have to go get the police, pay them a bribe, and bring them so that they could do whatever they were going to do. The police here set up checkpoints at the end and the beginning of the month in order to stop cars, to, you know, check people's tags. And if your tags are out of date, they pull you over to the side of the road where you pay your fine in cash. So, you know, another thing that's happened here is, I remember the first time we saw somebody being beaten by the police. We were in a grocery store. And there's a bunch of cops who got this guy and they're just carrying him on their shoulders while others are beating him. And he's just moaning and wailing and nobody's doing anything. And I'm like, what's going on? And the person in front of me in line just turns around and goes, he's a thief. And I'm just like, so he just gets beaten up by the police? And yes, that's absolutely what happens. So I say all that to say this. That's policing in the country where I live. And people here started talking about the corruption of American policing. That was a bridge too far. At that point, I thought, okay, I gotta do this. I've got to write this. And then when I would talk to people here about the actual numbers and what was happening, they would get this curious look on their face. Like, I don't get it, you know? Yeah. And to which I would respond, yeah, you're absolutely right. The police are not hunting and killing black men. You know, this is an invented narrative. And so anyway, all those things together just kind of, you know, pushed me over the edge to where I decided, you know, this needs to happen. Finally found somebody willing to publish it, and away we went.
The fault line idea is, just to hear you talk about it, Voddie, is I just personally to hear you talk about it is powerful, because Tom and I are observing this. We're talking about it nearly every single day. We're watching what's happening with the various organizations over here, and it's crazy. It's crazy to me, especially coming out of like Young, Restless, and Reformed, you know, and the New Calvinism, because there did seem to be, I've said this before publicly, I was sitting with Tom, I don't know which T4G it was, but one of the early T4Gs, sitting with Tom in Louisville, And I remember thinking, like, I was over the moon. Man, I was over the moon. I was like, the hymns and the songs, and
Yeah.
I was sitting with Tom, and Tom, in his way, you know, he's never going to like actually tell me. I could just tell he didn't seem quite as excited as me. He was very excited. He was for it. And I was like, Tom, what's the deal? And why aren't you excited? He said, well, I am. I'm very thankful. I'm overjoyed about what I see. I'm just concerned it might not be as deep as it needs to be right now. Doesn't have that doctrinal grounding. But even so, it's wild to look at what's going on over here in these fault lines. So I would love to hear you articulate more about what are those fault lines and what's going on. What do you see?
Well, here's the thing, then, to go to your issue. You know, I remember, being brought into some of those circles. I was never invited to be a part of, some of them, but, I was brought on as a council member of the Gospel Coalition, and, I preached at a number of these other, sort of events in this kind of new Calvinist resurgence or whatever. And I remember being very excited about that because, I am one of those individuals who did not come up in Calvinist ranks, came to the doctrines of grace late, and started off really just as a Calvinist and ended up being Reformed. There's a difference between being a Calvinist and being Reformed, right? There's 3 C's for the Reformed guys: Calvinistic, covenantal, and confessional. And so it was interesting, coming into that and beginning to hear warnings from people who were, writing books about the new Calvinism. And some of them being very charitable and saying, hey, this is a good thing. We're glad to see people embracing the doctrines of grace, but we worry about this, and this. And some of the things that guys were worrying about was how big the tent was and how many guys were in the tent calling themselves Reformed who weren't Reformed, who were not covenantal, who were not confessional, and whose cultural ethos was outside of sort of historic Reformed ethos, their understanding of law and gospel and things of this nature. And what's interesting about that is I've gone from scratching my head to, what are you guys, talking about, to now I look back and I look at the influence of critical race theory, intersectionality, the influence of this, what I would start calling the critical social justice movement. I look at the influence, and all of a sudden it's like those movements had Reformed guys at the helm, or more Reformed guys at the helm, older, mature guys who were reaching out to younger guys with platforms and bringing those younger guys with platforms in. And now what's happening is those younger guys with platforms are running headlong into the critical social justice movement. And instead of them having their chains jerked by the older guys are starting to follow them and begin to sound exactly like these young guys and are moving away from some of those very foundations. And so it's really been unsettling, to sort of watch that happen from afar. And, you guys know, since the Dallas statement, just like you, I mean, I've been canceled, to borrow a contemporary phrase. I've been canceled by these groups, just like you guys have. And I think, you asked me about some of the fault lines. I think one of the key fault lines was the Dallas statement. The Dallas statement on social justice in the gospel was a fault line. Mm-hmm. And there were people who signed it who were over here, and people who refused to sign it who were over here. And what was interesting is some of the people who refused to sign it, what's interesting about them is that they're very vocal people and they're very vocal critics. They didn't sign it, but they also did not give, not just didn't they give a substantive critique, they didn't give any critique to the statement. So there was nothing wrong with the statement that they were willing to critique, but they weren't willing to sign it. And why? Well, they haven't said, but for many of them, I believe it's because young guys and black guys and brown guys who they had embraced have run headlong into critical social justice. And a lot of these guys did not sign the statement because it would have meant repudiating some of the young guys they embraced and mentored.
Yeah, I think you're right, Voddie. And I remember having a conversation like that with one of these older guys, and he said that the statement, he was disappointed in it because this is almost a quote, it shut down some productive conversations on race that were taking place. Yep. And, I look at it, those conversations weren't productive, number one.
No.
And if we can't agree on some fundamentals that the Dallas statement lays out to have a conversation, then I'm wondering what we're talking about.
Right.
Because, there's not anything wild in that statement. At the end of By What Standard, you remember there's that scene in there with you and me talking at a church you helped found in Houston, Texas, and it was late, actually, man. I don't know. It was probably 2 in the morning when we were talking.
2 o'clock in the morning. I saw how red my eyes were in the film.
That's when the truth comes out. That's when right. The truth comes out at 2 a.m.
We may have needed a few more filters, but I do remember just a sober moment in our conversation. I think this is made it into the film, where you said you just think that division is inevitable. I mean, it just looks like we're not going to be able to avoid some separation, and that's heartbreaking, but God's done that in the past. So you've had 5 years to kind of not live and breathe the air regularly in the U.S., and man, you've been doing great work over there at the African Christian University in Lusaka, Zambia, and in the church where you're serving and other things that you continue to do. But from that perspective now, where do you think we need to be looking? And what do you think we ought to be doing? Those of us who are covenantal, confessional, those of us who do agree on the scriptures, even those, I'm finding great unity with brothers and sisters who are not covenantal and confessional, but who agree on the authority and sufficiency of scripture to address these current critical social justice issues. Where do you think we need to be taking our stands?
Yeah, I've been camping out 2 Corinthians 10. This is a spiritual war.
Amen.
And the weapons of our warfare, they're not carnal, right? They're not physical, but they are powerful, and they do destroy strongholds, and we've got to unleash them. And there's 2 things that we're called to do. Number one, we're called to destroy, and we're called to take captives. And I know people don't like that language because we're talking about our brothers. We're not talking about destroying our brothers. We're destroying arguments and lofty opinions raised against the knowledge of God. That's what we're destroying. And I think one of the things that has been happening is that people haven't been willing to destroy the arguments and lofty opinions because they don't want to be seen as trying to destroy their brothers. Mm-hmm. And the sad thing about that is that's not love. I think one of the things that's been exposed here as this fault line has shifted is it has exposed a false unity. Because if a brother is going to say that I'm not his brother because I have a different opinion on it, I think it's very interesting that these movements, now you look at, the Gospel Coalition, Together for the Gospel, and, all of these, sorts of groups that rose up, these different conferences that happened, and the different seminaries that were attached to this, and seminary presidents that were involved in this. And you had people, one of the beauties of it, and I think, Jared, one of the things that you were talking about being excited about, was that guys were saying, you know what, there are non-essentials that we disagree on. Things that we used to kill each other over. The Presbyterians used to baptize us to death, right? Mm-hmm. But now here we are, and we're saying, there are things that are more significant than that, and we're unifying over this. And it was amazing. And guys, talking about, continuationists and cessationists coming together and saying that's not going to divide. But now we're dividing on this issue of a critical race theory, intersectionality, critical social justice view of race. That is more significant to us than baptism, more significant to us than continuationism, and more significant to us than confessionalism. We were saying, you're not a confessional guy, we're a confessional guy, yada yada yada. But this view is more significant to us, to a group of people who were uniting in spite of a whole bunch of things. Now guys are saying, no, this is a bridge too far. And if you don't interpret these issues, down the line, according to the ways critical race theory and intersectionality view these issues, according to the way that critical social justice views these issues. So the definition of whiteness and white privilege and white supremacy, and now add to that white equilibrium and white fragility and, the call to anti-racism and so on and so forth. Now we're saying that those things, right, that is our confession. So you don't have to hold to Westminster. You don't have to hold to 1689, but you do have to hold to D'Angelo and Kendi.
Wow. Man, that is a profound way to put it, and that's exactly what's happening. I mean, that's a great way to think about it, because you find people now who do disagree on things that 10 years ago we were trying to rally around, but they agree on this social justice approach that's current, and they're the allies. And the ones of us who disagree but who agree with them confessionally, we're the opponents. And,
Voddie, Tom and I we've been thinking about what.
And the other thing too. No, go ahead.
Well, you go ahead. I'll follow up.
No, Jerry, go ahead.
Okay, well, because it just makes me so sad, man. And I know we're all sad about it, and because it's funny. We went through a lot with By What Standard, obviously, and man, we just said I love everybody. I just have this. I'm not mad at my brothers. I'm not bitter toward anybody. I love them, and it's sad to see this. And I'm wanting to say, how can we? What are those fault lines so that we can help as many people not be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophy? And you mentioned one, which I would just underscore, is this sense of if you stop with the 11th commandment, like stop with it. If you love your brother, you've got to say, and this is actually doctrine of God thing, because man, if I see Voddie sin, I love Voddie. I do care what Voddie thinks about me. I don't want, but that can't dominate our relationship. I got to go to Voddie, and then, well, what if Voddie doesn't repent and thinks you're wrong and doesn't like you? It's like, well, there's a God in heaven, and this is my brother. And
Jared, I think we got to back that up, though. We got to back that up and even say, if Voddie sins, we've got to make sure we're defining sin, not according to Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi and, we got a Kimberly Crenshaw and so on and so on. We got to make sure that we're defining it according to the law of God. And so, and I know you guys have done a lot of this talking about, law and gospel, but we've got to make sure that we're defining these things according to the law of God. And so when we're defining sin, by the way, this is one of the huge problems with the critical social justice movement, because there is a new original sin. And that new original sin is the sin of racism, and all white people are guilty of it. They're complicit in it by virtue of their whiteness. And that's just wrong. That's just not biblical. This idea that, I've talked about this idea of ethnic Gnosticism, and I unfold it, a little more in the book. But this idea that somehow, and by the way, the concept of ethnic Gnosticism is rooted in critical theory. They don't call it ethnic Gnosticism, but this idea that the world is divided into oppressors and oppressed, and the oppressed, by virtue of their oppression, have access to knowledge that the oppressors don't. because they're oppressors. Yeah. They're inherently blind. And so that's why we talk about listening to our brothers and sisters of color. That's why we're talking about listening to Black voices, you know. And again, so why? And then guys will fall into the trap and they'll say, well, what about a voice like Voddie's voice? No. My voice is not a Black voice, because according to critical race theory and critical social justice, the Black voice is the voice of the oppressed. If the person is not accepting the role of the oppressed and speaking from the perspective of oppression, then their voice is not authentically a Black voice.
Right.
So even that statement itself is a nod to critical theory. So when we start talking about, Black voices versus Black bodies, right?
Right.
Again, this is absolutely a nod to critical race theory. When the Attorney General of Kentucky, comes out and offers his findings, and you have people saying, that he's given one of the founders of BLM says he gave a Bull Connor speech in 2020. A former sergeant in the LAPD says he might be skin folk, but he's not kinfolk. In other words, he's a Black body, but he's not a Black voice. And so, again, this is all rooted and grounded in critical theory. So we have to be aware of where this stuff is coming from. And so there's two things there. Number one, destroy. Arguments and lofty opinions. So we need to identify the arguments and lofty opinions that are raised up against the knowledge of God, and they need to be destroyed for the sake of our brothers. And we need to be, open, honest, loving with our brothers, but fierce in the way that we fight and go to war with these ideologies. Okay. And then the second part of it is taking every thought captive. So we've got to recognize that one of the reasons that this is attractive is because our Christian brothers are not racist, right? Our Christian brothers love the brethren. I brought this. I told you I had a prop here. You guys can see this case, and inside this case, this is a SBC, symbol up here. Inside this case, there's this really nice fountain pen and this really nice, ink there, and has my name on it here. It's from 2001. When I was appointed chair of the Tellers Committee at the SBC. Now, I didn't get to go because of the flooding that year. I was in Houston trying to get to New Orleans, and it was flooding, and so I didn't get to go, although I was appointed chair. Why was I appointed chair of the Tellers Committee? When they appointed me chair of the Tellers Committee, I had to ask, what's the Tellers Committee? I'm not a political bone in my body. But let me back up a little bit. About a year or so before that, I had been in a meeting in the home of Paige Patterson. It was me, Derry Hodge, another, two Black doctoral students at Southeastern Seminary, and Patterson had given me permission. He's president of Southeastern. He had given me permission outside of the system. I was doing a D-Man, and my plan was to do a D-Man and then do a PhD. He gave me permission because I had this wild idea of going to Oxford and doing my DPhil at Oxford. He gave me written permission as the president to do my last year of the D-Man as the first year of the DPhil at Oxford, and to count that toward the completion of the one degree and the start of the other, because God loved me, but Paige had a wonderful plan for my life. Paige wanted to see me be the president of one of our seminaries, or the first Black president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And Paige was not about tokenism. And he sat us down and he said, it's important that you guys are doing this work because we love the brethren, and we've always tried, to embrace brothers of other ethnicities and see them rise up through the ranks. But guys, go off here, they go off there, they don't have our, share our theology or whatever. So just like it had happened throughout my entire theological career, I had white brothers reaching out to me, not giving me anything other than encouragement to stay the course because they wanted to see me succeed. And so that's what was happening. And Jared, you kind of joked earlier, about what happened to me. I'll tell you what happened to me. A few years later, I wrote a blog post, and Tom, I think this is when you and I started corresponding. And in that blog post, I came out as a Calvinist. And I don't know if you remember that or not, but I wrote a blog post explaining why I embraced the title of Calvinist. So that was strike one. The other strike was Bruce Short and I brought a resolution at the convention. I forget which year it was we brought that resolution, but it was that resolution about public schools, right? Calling for the investigation of the public schools. This radical agenda in the public schools. And so, I'm a proponent of home education, and the public schools are sacred, to Southern Baptists. And so because of those things, I ended up getting blacklisted in the SBC because I got off message, I got out of line. This wasn't, what our ideology was. And it's quite interesting that, nowadays we've got guys sort of going in different directions. And instead of the SBC, right or wrong, saying, no, this is not what our ideology is, they're sort of caving and letting things like Resolution 9 happen.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really interesting to watch, the way things have unfolded. I say all that to say this. One of the ironies is that people not only say that I'm not a black voice, but they try to explain why I'm not a black voice by saying that I'm trying to curry favor with white people, so that I can have elevated positions with white people. So let me see. I opened my mouth in the SBC where they wanted me to be the first black president of one of our seminaries, or the first black president of the SBC. So I opened my mouth and that was gone. Now recently I've opened my mouth and all of these other organizations that I used to be a part of now won't touch me with a 10-foot pole. But the answer people have is that I'm doing this in order to curry favor with white people. Yeah. As we say in Texas, man, that dog won't hunt.
The reason I think you're in trouble, Voddie, and the reason Tom's in trouble, the same. It's like, I want to be with both y'all guys wherever I go, because y'all both going to say something. Something's going to happen. It's going to be Voddie and Tom done said something. They're the first ones to say something. Everybody's going to be like throwing down. But, this is interesting. I just couldn't help but think about when you were talking, Voddie, about the two issues that Calvinism, public school. And yet the way it's being played now by the SBC, they're really caving. I'm suspicious that it's pragmatism just rampant in the SBC that plays it both ways. Absolutely. Right? So what you did, you hit two issues that transgressed pragmatism. Calvinism doesn't work and government schools don't work. But this CRT stuff does. It fits the pragmatic worldview. And it's just kind of trying to curry favor even with man. It's not trying to become all things to all men like Paul tells us, but we're trying to be accepted kind of by the world in order to do evangelism. And the issues you brought up don't fit. But this modern stuff right now seems to fit the spirit of the age, and so they're kind of moving with it.
Yeah, until they can't go far enough. And that's the thing. The whole anti-racist movement is upfront about the fact that you can never complete the work of anti-racism. Right. There is no there. There
so it's going to cost more than $5 million
from the original sin of. Yeah, no, it won't be enough. It won't be enough. You watch, because when you get letters, that are talking about the patriarchy and the pernicious, theology and the this and this of the founders or whatever. I'm telling you, you did $5 million. Number one, $5 million is not enough. But number two, you kept the names on the building. And then number three, you didn't cede power. You didn't give up your power to black people. And so now it's going to be, thank you for the $5 million. That was a nice first step, but where are you elevating black voices?
Yeah, that's
where are you putting black people in the seats of honor, and where are you tearing down all of the references to these individuals in your past whose sins today have been deemed unforgivable? Because tomorrow it'll be somebody else's sins.
Yeah.
You know, it's always somebody else's statue today, but eventually it's going to be yours.
You know, Voddie, one of the things you said a while ago, I want to circle back to, that at the bottom of all of this is a failure to recognize or appreciate or understand God's law. I mean, the law and the gospel. And we have hammered that, but I don't think we can hammer it enough, because God is the one who gets to define what is sin and what is righteous. And good night. I mean, I have enough trouble dealing with real sin in my life. I don't need anybody to manufacture new sins and try to make me measure up to their shifting standards in order to deal with that. When I hear people treat you and say about you the things that they do sometimes, or people like you who refuse to kowtow to the spirit of the age, it angers me. I mean, it angers me, because they are taking what they assume to be and what they propose to others is high moral ground, and they're trying to point out how you don't measure up to their high standard of righteousness, and their standard is wrong. Their standard is godless, and they are sinning while claiming that they're being morally superior. And the emperor has no clothes, and we have to be willing to say that. And I mean, one of the things I just appreciate you, man. I mean, I watched you on that A Time to Speak panel, you know, with Ed Stetzer and Thabiti Anyabwile. I think it's 2015, wasn't it, when you were in Memphis for that?
Matt Chandler and Matt,
those guys. And, you know, every one of them turned on you. Every one of them. And you refused to give 1 inch. And they were taking shots, cheap shots sometimes, and they weren't listening to you. They're twisting your words. And there was nothing they could do to get you to back down from just standing firmly on the law and the gospel. And that's desperately what we need today, man. I'm so grateful for you and your willingness not to budge on those issues.
Well, man, I appreciate that. And I just appreciate having friends, you know.
I hear you, bro. I hear you.
This is about is this the group? This is the group. I don't know if we have many more. Voddie, who will have you? So, hey.
You know, and it's interesting. It's interesting that, you know, now I get things, you know, like, my circle of friends is getting so small, and then people try to make me make my circle of friends even smaller. And so somebody told me, for example, that, you know, Jeff Durbin apparently, you know, stepped out of line here recently in a message that he did at the Fight Love Feast or something like that. And I'm getting emails from people asking me why I haven't spoken up to condemn Jeff Durbin. Well, first of all, I've never met the man. Secondly, what did he do? You know? And then they're like, you know, he did this and he did that. But then not only am I supposed to condemn Jeff Durbin, but I'm supposed to condemn the Fight La Feast guys. And so, how did it go? No, okay, maybe you didn't hear what the message, and maybe you don't know Durbin, but you do know James White, and James White is at Durbin's church, and the guys at Fight Love Feast, they speak highly of you. Therefore, since you know the one guy who knows him and the other guys who did the event speak highly of you, you're therefore ugly. I was like, what are you talking about?
There's some fundamentalist stuff going on right there.
They put fundamentalists to shame.
And they say we're the ones being fundamentalists on this thing.
Oh, man.
Voddie, you got so much, man. What would you say?
And, you know, and here's the other ironic thing. Here's the other ironic thing about it. People are saying that, you know, we're trying to truncate the gospel, and, you know, we don't understand the implications of the gospel and this and that and the other. You know what's funny about that? Two things are funny about that. Number one, some of these same people were saying that I was being too broad in my application of the gospel because of my advocacy for home education in particular, and for Christian education for parents in general. And so when I did What He Must Be, and with the Ever-Loving Truth, Family Shepherds, and What He Must Be, there are people who felt like I was applying the gospel too broadly in dealing with those family issues and educational issues and things like that, right? Some of those same people now are saying that I'm a fundamentalist because I'm not willing to apply the gospel to the work of anti-racism. But I'm going to go you one further. Why did I come to Zambia? To help start the African Christian University, which is a classical Christian, liberal arts, biblical worldview university. You know what's interesting about that? There are people, when I tell them what I'm doing, they always say, oh, you guys are starting a Bible college. No, it's not a Bible college. Oh, you guys are starting, no, we're starting a university. We're offering degrees in agriculture, business, education, fine arts, theology, getting ready to add biology and chemistry. And some of these same people could not wrap their mind around it. We have a hard time raising funds for ACU because there are people who get doing a Bible college because, Africans, Bible college, preach the gospel, get them saved so they don't go to hell. But then they hear about the expansive work that we're doing, and they can't wrap their heads around it because they're fundamentalists who don't get the broader view that we have of this university. And now people turn around and say that I'm being a fundamentalist because I'm not embracing the twisted view of anti-racism as being part of the gospel, not because I think racism is okay, but because anti-racism is part of a worldview that is counter to the gospel. So don't sit there and try to tell me that, I'm not willing to expand my understanding of the implications of the gospel broadly enough.
If you get rid of God's word and God's law as the standard, then any old standard will do, and they can measure you by it and beat you up all day. That's exactly what's happening.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's interesting the way that's shaken down, Voddie, and we've sensed the same thing. Like, in some ways, as I watched YRR kind of go south, Chris Tomlin got out of the city, went out and sang, but then they kind of got put in the pocket of the city. They didn't have their Bibles with them. And then there are these other kind of fundamentalists draw high walls. We shouldn't be involved in culture and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're striking at that with the Wield the Sword project that we've got going on, that we're so excited about. You going to be here, going to be recording season 2 on that. And I think there's doctrine under that, and important doctrines about the nature of the kingdom of Christ and its relationship to the world, in the sense that it is coming on earth as it is in heaven. And there's the relationship of the physical and the spiritual and the very nature of reality itself. I think all of that's going on, and I hope a recovery of those doctrines, as you said, destroying certain arguments, and then teaching clearly so that some of our brothers can get right on this, because I do think there's a good impulse, but there's been not a deep enough doctrinal grounding. I do have another question for you. I don't know, we're kind of running, but just one more, or one go at it with 2 different questions, Voddie. You see these fault lines, especially in American evangelicalism, probably in American Reformed evangelicalism. Tom knows many of the leaders in all of this. What is your message to them, given the fact of these fault lines and some that have been unwilling to speak, or just how would you direct to the leaders? What would be your word to them that you would see good things to come? And then secondly, what would be your word to just pastors throughout our community? What should they be doing given the situation at hand?
I would say 2 things: man up and love.
Amen.
Those would be my 2 things: man up and love. And when I say man up, what I mean by that is this: there are a lot of these guys, and I am aware, I've had things shared with me. These guys do not believe this stuff. These guys know better, But what they're doing right now is they're saying, for example, they're saying things like, yeah, we know that, the police are not really hunting down and killing black men, but our black brothers and sisters really feel this deeply, so on and so forth. And so, number one, man up, say that, speak that truth, because guys are saying it behind closed doors, but they're not saying it publicly, right? Publicly, they're out there parroting the whole, Black Lives Matter thing and so on and so forth. But privately, these guys know better, but they're not willing to say it. And the second one, man up, and the second one is love, right? Because love me enough that if I'm being unreasonable about something, that you'll tell me I'm being unreasonable. Love me enough to say to me, brother, I understand that you're hurting, and I appreciate that you're hurting, but let's back up here a little bit. And rather than just jumping all in and turning your hurt into whatever I feel is factual, let's separate what you're feeling from what is factual. That's what love does, right? Love doesn't just say, my brother's hurting, and so he's running away from the facts. So we're just going to pat him on the head, and not say anything about the facts, because that's how we're going to prove that we love. No, that's not proving that you love him. That's proving that you don't respect him. That's the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Amen, brother.
Amen.
Man, I thank God for you, Voddie. I do so much, man. And it's been great to have this conversation. And we are excited about the book. I'm really excited about you being here in January, just getting to see you again, and then having you do Wield the Sword. We're going to have a great time with this Doctrine of God conference. It's crazy. This thing's taken off, man. I think we're already at 700, 650, 700. It's spiking and has been. So we're going to have a really good time at that conference. And then you're doing a tour, or can we talk about the tour at all? Because you taking By What Standard when you go on that tour, the By What Standard book?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And those have been flying off the shelves.
Yeah, I saw Jay was selling them when I wasn't even selling them at a recent conference. I said, man, Jay's selling these books. I'm not even selling these books.
Yeah. But yeah, we're going to be doing a number of things in Florida.
Good.
While I'm there, so I'll be there for 2 weeks. Starting with the G3 cruise.
Yes, right.
And so, yeah. And
nice.
then,
looking forward to that.
A couple other things, there in Florida. But yeah, I haven't, I haven't been out there for a while. I usually go do at least 3 2-week tours every year in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And one somewhere else in the world. And my tours got canceled.
Right.
This year, everything just I got canceled this year. So I mean, by God's grace, we've been able to make it. But I need to get back to work.
Sure.
That's still the primary way that we are, support ourselves. So yeah, I'll be back and excited about being able to do another tour, and also just getting my boots on the ground and being in the fight again.
Good.
On that side.
We'll link to ACU and Voddie Baucham Ministries, and folks, man, encourage you, if you have means, to support Voddie and what he's doing over in Lusaka. It's a great work, and it has potential to do good for generations. Voddie, do you have a few minutes to hang on, and we'd like to have just a further conversation
definitely
with
you. But can I also give him one more website?
Yeah.
It's called Muzulu.org, Muzulu, Muzulu.org, which is another ironic thing, because, Muzulu is something that we started a couple of years ago with a view toward helping people partner with the work that we're doing here with evangelistic partnerships, educational partnerships, and economic partnerships. How's that for somebody who has a fundamentalist view of the scope of the gospel?
Yeah, we'll make sure and link to that as well. So thanks for that. It's been good to talk to you, brother.
Yeah, we'll jump in the armory here in just a minute. We're going to shut down this podcast, but we'll talk for about 5 or 10 minutes more and a little bit deeper dive into things. And that armory is for those who are a part of the FAM. That is the Founders Alliance members. And if you're not a part of the FAM, you can join. Go to founders.org and check that out. We're always putting content up there in the armory. So get into that FAM and then check out what we've got there. Thanks so much for listening to The Sword and the Trowel today.